The zipper had been broken for 3 days, and Gareth Voss had been carrying it around in his jacket pocket like a small, unsolved problem, waiting for a night when his hands weren't too swollen from work to fix it properly. That morning, standing on the wet brick path outside Alder Ridge College, kneeling on one knee in front of a laughing crowd of strangers, he finally got the chance. He just didn't expect it to cost him quite so much. Gareth was 46 years old, and if you'd asked him what he did for a living, he would have given you 2 answers, because he had 2 jobs, and neither one paid enough on its own. 4 nights a week he worked the loading dock at Kessler Freight, stacking pallets until his shoulders ached in a way that no amount of stretching seemed to fix anymore. On the days in between, he mended things. Shoes, mostly. Bags, belts, the occasional jacket lining that had given up around the elbows. He'd learned the trade from his father, who had run a small repair stall in the same town for almost 30 years before his knees gave out and Gareth quietly took it over, first as a favor, then as a habit, then as something closer to survival. His daughter, Marlo, was 19 and in her 2nd year at Alder Ridge, studying early childhood education because she wanted, in her words, a job where nobody yells at you for doing your best. She commuted from home instead of living in the dorms, partly because it was cheaper, and partly because since her mother died 4 years ago, from a slow and unglamorous kind of cancer that took 18 months to finish its work, Marlo had developed a habit of checking on her father the way some people check on the weather. Quietly, and often. That morning had started wrong in the small, specific ways mornings go wrong when money is tight and time is tighter. The coffee maker had sputtered out halfway through brewing. Marlo's bus was running 4 minutes early instead of late, which somehow felt worse, because it meant she missed it by exactly the amount of time she thought she had to spare. She left the house half jogging, her backpack, an old canvas one that had belonged to her mother, army green with a faded university patch stitched onto the front pocket, bouncing against her hip with every step. Gareth noticed the strap was loose before she was even out the door. He almost said something. He didn't, because she was already late, and some fights aren't worth having at 7 in the morning. He found out how loose exactly 2 hours later, when Marlo called him from the campus courtyard, her voice tight in that particular way it got when she was trying very hard not to cry in public. "Dad, it just ripped. Right off. In the middle of the walkway. Everything's on the ground. Are you hurt?" "No. Everyone's staring. It's fine. I'll just carry it." He told her to wait. He didn't think about it much beyond that. He grabbed his repair kit, a small canvas roll with wax thread, a curved needle, a leather punch, and a stub of beeswax worn down to almost nothing, and he drove the 14 minutes to campus in his work jacket, because he'd been about to leave for a repair job across town and hadn't changed yet. He didn't think about how he looked. He rarely did. It wasn't vanity that kept him from noticing, it was simply that noticing had stopped being useful to him a long time ago. The courtyard outside the Ellison Humanities building was the kind of place designed to look impressive in a brochure: brick paths, a fountain that hadn't worked properly since spring, banners with the college crest snapping in the wind, flags for the state and the country standing at attention near the entrance. Students moved through it in loose clusters, phones out, laughter carrying easily in the damp morning air. Marlo was standing near a bench, backpack slung over one arm, the strap torn clean through at the seam. She looked relieved when she saw her father's truck pull up along the curb, and less relieved a moment later, when she watched him get out of it. He was wearing his work jacket, gray and a little too big, the kind that had been washed enough times to lose its color in patches. His jeans had a stain near the knee from a spilled can of machine oil he hadn't gotten around to treating. His boots were the ones he wore on the loading dock, scuff pale at the toes. He looked, to anyone who didn't know him, like a man who had wandered onto campus from somewhere else entirely, and in a way, he had. He walked up to Marlo, took the backpack from her without much ceremony, and knelt right there on the brick path to look at the strap. "Give me 2 minutes," he said. "I brought the kit." He didn't kneel like a man doing a favor. He knelt like a man doing a job, the same way he might have knelt in his own kitchen at midnight, threading a needle by lamplight while a pot of something simmered on the stove behind him. He turned the bag over in his hands, found the tear, and started working the needle through the canvas with the kind of patient, unhurried focus that had never once been rewarded with anything more than a paycheck too small for the effort it represented. It was right about then that a group of students walking past slowed down. There were 5 of them, cutting across the courtyard on their way to the dining hall, and the one who noticed first was a girl named Odalise Fairweather, tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a navy-sheath dress and heels that were clearly not meant for brick pathways, her hair blown out that morning in a way that suggested either a very good hairdresser or a very long routine. She was popular in the way that certain people are popular in college, not because anyone particularly liked her, but because she moved through rooms like she expected people to make space for her, and most people did. She stopped walking. She nudged the boy next to her. "Oh my God, look." The boy, his name was Terrence, and he mostly followed Odalise around because he had a crush on her that everyone but Odalise seemed to have noticed, looked over and laughed before he'd even processed what he was laughing at. "Is that guy trying to steal that bag? He's, like, kneeling over it. That's so weird." Someone else in the group had their phone out already, filming, the way people do now before they've decided whether something is worth filming, just in case. Odalise stepped closer, closer than she needed to, close enough that Gareth glanced up briefly and then went back to his stitching, because he had learned, over the years, that the fastest way through most humiliations was simply to keep his hands moving. "Sir," Odalise said, in a voice pitched for an audience rather than for him, "is that your bag?" "It's my daughter's," Gareth said, not looking up. Odalise made a face at her friends, the kind of face that says watch this is going to be good, and Terrence laughed again, on cue. "Sure it is," she said. "Does the school know you're just, like, out here going through people's stuff? Somebody should call campus security." Marlo, standing a few feet away, felt something close up in her chest. "He's my dad," she said. "He's fixing the strap." Odalise looked at her properly for the first time, taking in Marlo's plain sweatshirt, her sneakers with the sole starting to peel at the toe, and something in her expression shifted from performance to something closer to real cruelty, the kind that comes easily to people who have never had to think about what things cost. "Oh," she said. "That's your dad." She didn't say anything else for a second. She didn't need to. The way she looked between Gareth kneeling on the pavement in his stained work jacket and Marlo standing there in clothes that had clearly been worn past their first life did the talking for her. "That's kind of sad, honestly," she said, to her friends, not quite quietly enough. "Like, is that what you're gonna look like in 20 years? A couple of the boys laughed, more out of habit than conviction. The phone was still up, recording. Gareth kept stitching. His hands didn't shake, but Marlo noticed that his jaw had tightened, the same way it used to when her mother was sick and someone said something thoughtless in a hospital hallway, thinking they were being helpful. "You don't have to do that," Marlo said quietly, to her father, meaning, you don't have to fix it here, in front of everyone, you don't have to let them watch. "Almost done," Gareth said. "Strap's the only thing wrong with it. Rest of the bag's fine." He tied off the thread, bit it clean with his teeth, a habit that made Marlo wince every single time, and turned the bag right side out, testing the strap with a firm tug before handing it back to her. "Should hold," he said. "If it doesn't, bring it home and I'll do it properly with the machine." It might have ended there, quietly, the way most small humiliations do, a bruise nobody sees, healing on its own over a few uncomfortable days, except that Odalise wasn't quite finished. She'd found her footing now, and a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the particular gravity that forms whenever someone is being laughed at in public. "Wait, are you seriously homeless?" she asked, tilting her head, feigning concern in a way that was almost more insulting than open mockery would have been. "Like, is that why you're doing this out here? Do you need money or something?" A ripple of laughter went through the small crowd. Not everyone was laughing, a few people looked uncomfortable, glancing away, the way people do when they sense something is wrong but haven't decided it's their place to say so. But enough people laughed that it filled the space, the way laughter does, expanding to take up whatever room is available. Gareth stood up slowly, brushing off his knee. He was not a large man, but he had the kind of stillness that made people quiet down without him raising his voice. "I work 2 jobs, he said, evenly. One of them's fixing bags and shoes for people around here. I'm not asking anybody for anything." "Okay, but you're, like, on your knees on the ground," Odalise said, laughing again, though something in her voice had gone slightly uncertain, the way it does when a joke isn't landing quite the way you'd planned. "That's kind of the definition of asking for something. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Marlo, who had spent most of her life being the quiet one, the one who let things go rather than make a scene, found herself stepping forward before she'd decided to. "He's not asking you for anything," she said, and her voice came out sharper than she expected, sharper than she'd ever spoken to anyone at that school. He drove here on his lunch break to fix my bag because I couldn't afford a new one. That's it. That's the whole story. You don't get to make fun of that. The courtyard had gone a little quieter. Odalise blinked, clearly not used to being answered back. I was just joking, she said, in the tone of someone realizing, a beat too late, that the joke had an audience she hadn't accounted for. It was right around then that a woman's voice cut through the small crowd, sharp and immediate in a way that made several students straighten up on instinct. Gareth. The woman was Professor Idella Marchetti, who taught 2 sections of developmental psychology and had a reputation, fair or not, for being the kind of instructor who noticed everything and forgot nothing. She was walking briskly from the direction of the parking lot, a stack of folders under one arm, and she stopped a few feet from the group, looking between Gareth and the small crowd with an expression that shifted quickly from surprise to something more careful. Gareth Voss, she said again, this time not as a question. It is you. Gareth looked up, and for the first time that morning, something in his face eased slightly. Idella. Didn't expect to see you out here. I was about to say the same thing. She looked at the crowd, at the phone still half raised in someone's hand, at Odalise standing there with her arms crossed, unsure now of what exactly was happening. What's going on? Nobody answered right away. Marlowe spoke first. My backpack strap ripped. My dad came to fix it. He came to fix it, Professor Marchetti repeated, and something in the way she said it made it sound less like a simple fact and more like she was turning over an old memory. She looked at Gareth again. You still doing the boots? When people bring them, Gareth said, a little sheepish now, the way people get when praise arrives unexpectedly and they don't know where to put it. Professor Marchetti turned to the students still gathered, most of whom had gone quiet, sensing that whatever had been funny a minute ago wasn't anymore. 3 years ago, she said, the week before finals, I slipped on the ice outside the library and the heel came clean off my boot. I had 2 lectures left to give and no way to get home and change. This man, she nodded at Gareth, was here that week fixing a strap for someone else, same as today, and he fixed my boot on the spot with a tube of something out of his jacket pocket. Wouldn't take $1 for it. Told me to buy a coffee for the next student who looked like they were having a rough week instead. A few students shifted their weight, unsure what to do with that information now that it had arrived in the middle of a moment built entirely on the opposite assumption. He's not somebody who needs money from strangers, Professor Marchetti went on, quieter now, mostly to Odalise, though not unkindly, more like someone correcting a student's math on the board rather than scolding them. He's somebody who's been quietly helping people on this campus for years, in ways most of us never see, because he's never once asked to be seen doing it. Odalise looked, for the first time that morning, genuinely embarrassed, the kind of embarrassment that has nowhere to hide because it happened in front of an audience she'd gathered herself. I didn't know that, she said, quietly, mostly to the ground. Most people don't, Professor Marchetti said. That tends to be the whole point. The crowd thinned out after that, the way crowds do once the entertainment has stopped being entertaining. A few students lingered to say something, mostly small, awkward things, an apology mumbled toward Gareth's shoulder rather than his face, a boy who offered, unprompted, to buy him a coffee, which Gareth declined with a small shake of his head and a, you don't owe me anything, I'm all right. Odalise didn't leave right away. She stood there a moment longer than the others, arms still crossed, looking at Marlowe. I'm sorry, she said, and it came out smaller than her earlier voice, less performed. That was really out of line. I don't know why I do that. Marlowe didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't, and she'd never been good at pretending things were fine when they weren't. But she nodded, because there wasn't much use in holding onto it either. Just don't do it to somebody else, she said. Odalise nodded and walked off with her friends, quieter than she'd arrived. Gareth packed up his repair kit, rolling the canvas back around the needle and thread with the same unhurried care he'd used to fix the strap. Professor Marchetti stayed a moment longer, glancing at Marlowe. You're his daughter, she said. You should know he never once mentioned any of this to me before today. I only knew because I happened to be there when it happened. That's just how he is. I know, Marlowe said. It's kind of a problem, honestly. He never tells anyone anything. Professor Marchetti smiled at that, the first real smile of the morning. Some people wear their good deeds like a coat everyone can see. Others just fold them up and put them in a drawer. He's the second kind. She looked at Gareth. Come by my office sometime. I still owe you for the boots. You don't owe me anything, Gareth said, for what might have been the third time that morning, and meant it every time. They walked back toward the truck together, Marlo carrying her newly stitched backpack, the strap holding fast, the canvas patched in a place that would probably outlast the rest of the bag. Neither of them said much for a minute. The courtyard behind them had gone back to its normal rhythm, students crossing in loose clusters, the broken fountain still not working, banners still snapping in the wind. You okay? Gareth asked eventually. I should be asking you that. I've had worse mornings, he said, and he wasn't exaggerating, though he didn't explain further, and Marlo didn't ask him to. There were things about the last 4 years, about hospital bills that never quite stopped arriving, about nights at the loading dock when his hands were too tired to hold a needle steady, about the quiet second job he'd built almost entirely out of necessity and stubbornness, that neither of them needed to say out loud for both of them to understand. You didn't have to fix it right there, Marlo said. You could have just told me to bring it home. You needed it today, Gareth said simply. Tomorrow doesn't help you carry your books this afternoon. It was such a plain, unremarkable thing to say, and it struck Marlo harder than anything Odalise had said that morning, in the opposite direction. It wasn't a grand statement. It was just true, in the way her father's decisions had always quietly been true, underneath the surface of a life that looked, from the outside, like it hadn't given him very much. Word moved through campus the way it always does, faster and messier than the actual event, by the time Marlo got to her afternoon class. A version of the story had already reached a few people who hadn't been there, most of it exaggerated in the retelling, some of it stripped of the parts that mattered. But underneath the exaggeration, one detail seemed to survive every version. A man had knelt on a public sidewalk to fix his daughter's bag, been mocked for it by a stranger who assumed the worst, and turned out to be someone who had been quietly repairing things, bags, shoes, small moments of dignity, for people on that campus for years, without ever asking for recognition. By the following week, a folded $5 bill and a handwritten note appeared taped to the community board outside the student center, addressed simply to the man who fixes bags, thanking him for the boots 3 years back and asking, almost shyly, if he'd be willing to look at a jacket sometime. Gareth never found out who left it. He didn't especially need to. He kept doing what he'd always done, quietly, without much ceremony, on the days between his shifts at the loading dock, whenever someone needed something mended and couldn't easily afford to have it done elsewhere. Odalise, for her part, didn't become a different person overnight, because people rarely do. But a few weeks later, Marlo noticed her in the courtyard helping a freshman pick up a stack of dropped textbooks, not filming it, not performing it for anyone, just doing it because the boy looked flustered and late. It wasn't a transformation. It was just a small, ordinary correction, the kind most people are capable of if given a reason to look a little closer before they laugh. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. Marlo kept the backpack the rest of that year, strap and all, even after she could have afforded a new one. She said once, half joking, that it was the only bag on campus that had been stitched by hand instead of stamped out in a factory, and that felt like it was worth something, even if nobody else noticed. Gareth never talked about that morning much afterward. When people brought it up, he tended to shrug and say the strap had needed fixing, and that was really all there was to it. He didn't think of himself as someone who had taught anyone a lesson. He'd just knelt down and done the next necessary thing, the same as he had 1,000 times before, on loading docks and kitchen tables, and now, once, on a wet brick path outside a college building, in front of people who assumed, for a few minutes, that the wrong thing about him was the truest thing about him. Comment: kindness still exists, if you believe even one good act can change someone's life. There wasn't a grand reveal in the end, no fortune uncovered, no stranger turning out to be someone important in disguise. There was only a tired man with a needle and thread, a daughter who finally said out loud what she'd always known quietly, and a small crowd that had to sit, briefly, with the discomfort of having laughed at the wrong thing. Sometimes that's the whole story. Sometimes the truth that finally comes out isn't a secret fortune or a hidden identity, it's simply that the person you mocked for having nothing had, in fact, been quietly giving away what little he did have, for years, to anyone who needed it. And once you've seen that clearly, it's very hard to laugh at kneeling the same way again.